So the time is finally here. Today, we get to break down the game that I personally have as my game of the week in week 2 of college football. And that's the Alabama Crimson Tide taking on the Texas Longhorns and Nick Saban taking on his former offensive coordinator, Steve Sarkisian. We need to break down the matchups I'm going to be watching, why I believe this is such an interesting game, and everything in between. But before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. I need to hear from you. Hop down to the comments, give me an A for Alabama or a T for Texas, signifying who you think's going to win this game, and then let me know the matchups you're interested in watching. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification as I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And we're on our push to 15,000 subscribers. I'd love to have you a part of this awesome community, and if you enjoyed this content, like and comment down below, as those interactions, though seemingly small, are massive. But having said all that, let's jump right into this, and there are several different ways we could go first when talking about this matchup, but I want to start off talking about why I believe this is such an interesting game. First and foremost, you have the fact that Texas is trying to regain their footing within college football. On top of that, Steve Sarkisian was the former offensive coordinator for Nick Saban's Crimson Tide, and when Steve Sarkisian was there, those offenses and those Crimson Tide teams were dangerous. Inevitably, when we're talking college football and college football fandom, storylines reign supreme, and there's a storyline you're sure to hear over and over again on Saturday, and a storyline I'm sure you've heard multiple times leading up to this game, and that's the last time these two programs played, which was in the 2009 National Championship. Because ever since that game, these two programs have gone in polar opposite trajectories. The Texas Longhorns have never been able to regain where they were during that time, and the Alabama Crimson Tide have gone on an unprecedented run within college football that just seems to keep going. Fast forward to now, and that storyline is sure to be at the forefront of all fans' minds as they watch this game, but what I find most compelling are the matchups we're going to see on the field. So now, let's break that down, and first and foremost, we need to have an understanding that even though Alabama is favored in this game, that does not guarantee them a victory, and in fact, Nick Saban hit the podium and even alluded to this, talking about how yes, Alabama may open up as an X amount point favorite, but the last time they opened up as a massive point favorite against a team in Texas, they lost, talking about the Texas A&M game just last year. The reason why I bring that up is because some people think that this is going to be an open and shut case, but football is played for a reason. Anything can happen out on the field, and because of that, we need to break down the keys for success for both teams, and we're going to start with Texas's offense against Alabama's defense. What's it going to take for the Texas Longhorns offense to find success against the Crimson Tide defense, and likewise, what's it going to take for Alabama's defense to find that success against Texas's offense? We'll start with Texas's offense, and I think the first area I'm going to be watching will come as no surprise. It's Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson's one of the premier players in college football, not even mentioning offensive or defensive players. He's just one of the premier players in the entirety of college football, and because of that, he's going to be a guy that I think Texas relies heavily on come Saturday. Whether we're talking in the traditional run game or the passing game, Bijan has the ability to make positive impacts wherever you put him. Now, whenever we look at this matchup in particular, this is where it gets interesting because Alabama historically has been real good at stopping the run. And so whenever you look at this matchup, you may be asking yourself, well, how come your most key player for Texas is the running back? Well, it's not only what Bijan Robinson offers as a traditional running back, but it's how he's able to affect the game catching the ball out the backfield. That is where I think Steve Sarkisian is going to try and put Bijan Robinson to get some favorable matchups. And why not? Whenever you have a player of that caliber, it just makes sense. And especially whenever you look at the defense for Alabama and you really key into on especially when you look at the defense for Alabama and key in on what they're good at, and that's traditionally been stopping the run. Because of that, you're going to get your playmaker involved any way you can, and I think getting Bijan the ball out the backfield is going to open up opportunities for other people if they're able to do so effectively. Now, the second area I'm going to be watching is Xavier Worthy. And even though I said Xavier Worthy, we could probably scratch that and just say Texas's wide receivers against Alabama's defensive backs. And the reason is quite simple. Because if you talk to Texas fans, there's a lot of excitement they have in that wide receiver room, and deservedly so. Whether we're talking about Xavier Worthy, Brennan Thompson, Whittington, and not to mention Ajayi Hall, Ball, who was reinstated and we may get to see in this game. If you listen to the Texas faithful, they're very excited about the playmakers they have in that room. And so when we look at the game come Saturday, yes, Worthy is a legitimate deep threat, but more than I'm interested in the deep ball for Texas, I'm interested to see what they do in the short to intermediate game. Because as we talk about what Texas's offense needs to do to be successful, we need to remember there's a machine on the other side of that offense in Alabama's defense. And once we peer into what they need to do to be successful, they have two dudes on the edge that are going to be teeing off if given the opportunity, and that's why I'm interested to see how Steve Sarkisian utilizes the short to intermediate to see if he can open up the deep shot as the game progresses. That's where this is going to get super intriguing. And finally, the playmaker that I am really interested in for Texas is Ja'Tavion Sanders, the tight end. Because when we look at how offenses are able to hurt Alabama's defense, tight ends have been a way that multiple teams have been able to do it. And Ja'Tavion Sanders is an incredibly athletic individual. A former 5-star coming out of high school, hailing from Denton Ryan High School in Denton, Texas. This is a dude that when he was in high school, put up highlight catch after highlight catch. I mean, seriously, if you go back and check it out, he was making one-handed grabs like they were going out of style. We got to see what he was capable of during ULM, and what we saw was an athletic tight end who is incredibly difficult to bring to the ground. This is where I'm really keyed in on, because Steve Sarkisian is a creative offensive mind. Whenever we look at Texas's offense, one thing we need to understand is from a playmaking position, they have got a lot of weapons. In the wide receiver room with Bijan Robinson, Roschon Johnson, Keelan Robinson, and then at the tight end position with Ja'Tavion Sanders. So whenever we look at that, there's a lot Steve Sarkisian is going to try and do to keep Alabama's defense on their heels and guessing as to what's coming next. But because of that, I think a tight end, being able to try and find favorable matchups with linebackers is going to be something that Steve Sarkisian looks to do at a high degree because it can open up the offensive game plan for everybody else. But now let's flip the script and talk about what Alabama's defense needs to do to find success against the Texas offense. And we need to start in the trenches because that's where Alabama has a big advantage. Texas's offensive line is experiencing growing pains, and last season they left a lot to be desired, and Alabama's defensive front is full of dudes. And even though they have to replace some production on the interior, there's some names in that interior that the Crimson Tide fan base and coaches are very excited about. Whenever I was talking about the Texas offense, you heard me talk time and time again about the need to establish a short to intermediate game. This is exactly why. Because if I was a betting man, I would bet a lot of money that Steve Sarkisian is going to be trying to get the ball out of his young quarterback's hand quickly to get him in rhythm and to keep Will Anderson and Dallas Turner from getting home and establishing that confidence. Because on the edges, you have Will Anderson and Dallas Turner, two of the best edge rushers in all of college football, and I contend Will Anderson is the best college football player in the nation. That is where I think everybody is going to be watching first and foremost, and especially when you look, and they're going to have inexperienced offensive linemen trying to block them, freshman offensive linemen trying to block them, and an offensive line that had a lot of struggles a year ago for the Texas Longhorns. But unfortunately for Texas, it's not just the edge you really need to worry about, because Alabama has several playmakers that they're confident in the middle that at the very least stuff holes and allow the linebackers to go make plays for little to no gain. That's going to be something that can help Alabama's defense stop Texas's rushing attack. And as I said, you need to take things away from the Texas Longhorns. And yes, Bijan is a very talented back who they're going to utilize in the passing game, but if you can eliminate the threat of a rush early on in this game, you're going to be putting your defense, your offense, and your team in a really good position for the remainder of this game. So Alabama's defensive front is the first area I'm going to be looking at. The next area for the Alabama defense we need to highlight is the linebackers, and there's several reasons why. First and foremost, whenever you're dealing with a running back that's as effective out the backfield as Bijan is, you have to remain cognizant as to where he is and what he's doing at all times. Likewise, whenever we saw Texas use Ja'Tavion Sanders the way they did last week and how high they remain on him, you have to make sure you know where he is too and that you don't let him get lost in the fold. But another major reason why the linebackers are going to be so key in this game is actually something I highlighted after Alabama won the national championship against Ohio State, where I did the film breakdown video of that game, highlighting Steve Sarkisian's play calling. And in that video, we talked about the pre-snap eye candy Steve Sarkisian's going to present present. The linebackers are going to have to see through that so that way they don't get fooled, because if you get fooled, someone's going to be there to take advantage of it in this Steve Sarkisian offense. So the linebackers for the Crimson Tide are going to be key. And then finally for Alabama's defense, and I know this seems like we've covered the entire defense, but whenever you look at how I address the Texas offense and the ways they could attack the defense, I must then answer in turn. The last area we're going to talk about this defense for is the secondary, and specifically the safety position, because this is where Alabama gets intriguing on the defensive side. They return two veteran safeties in Jordan Battle and DeMarco Helms, who are going to be trying to bait Quinn Ewers into making mistakes. That's something I'm going to be watching closely, but also if we're talking about the secondary as a whole, there's a lot of healthy competition in this secondary. Kool-Aid McKinstry, Eli Ricks, Kyrie Jackson, Terrion Arnold, all individuals, incredibly capable defensive backs. Alabama's lucky that there is this sort of competition there because iron sharpens iron, as Nick Saban always says. But one of the reasons why I've been so keyed in on what Texas is going to be able to do from a passing perspective mainly revolves around the front seven for Alabama. And even though I have tremendous amount of faith in Alabama's secondary, I still think the key for Alabama's defense remains on that front. But do not be surprised if you see the safeties try and bait Quinn Ewers into throwing interceptions because of his youth and inexperience. That's going to be where I watch closely, and especially how the Alabama corners are able to deal with Texas's playmakers, because Texas does have some really legit wide receiver threats. If we flip this now and talk about Alabama's offense against Texas's defense, we need to talk first and foremost about Bryce Young, because Bryce Young is a straight-up magician, and I don't need to say much in terms of what Bryce Young brings to the table. He's someone who's just as effective outside the pocket as he is inside the pocket, not to mention last week against Utah State, we got to see him utilize his legs, something I have to wonder if they'll bring to the table this week. Whenever we're looking at this Alabama offense, there's a lot of new, yes, but there is a lot of talent, and I've remained very high on this wide receiver room all summer. One thing I've repeated time and time again is this room is not short on talent, it may just be short on experience. But whenever we look at the outside wide receivers for Alabama, there's a lot of names to be excited for. Whether it's Trayshawn Holden, Ja'Cory Brooks, Jermaine Burton, Kobe Prentice, Isaiah Bond, Christian Leary, you get my point. There's several different names you need to be aware of that could make a real impact in this game. Kobe Prentice has the ability to take the top off the defense, as does Isaiah Bond. Jermaine Burton is just such a consistent force, and I think he's going to be due for a big game this week. And then you have Trayshawn Holden and Ja'Cory Brooks, two of the bigger body wide receivers who I think Alabama will look to utilize heavily in this game. But one area for Alabama that I'm really excited to see is the running game, because Jahmyr Gibbs is an explosive player, and everything we talked about with Bijan Robinson carries over to Jahmyr Gibbs, that he's effective in a traditional sense running the ball, but he is ultra dangerous out the backfield as a pass catcher. But whenever you look at what Alabama did last week, they had some plays that I loved, and it was when they were utilizing both Jahmyr Gibbs and Jace McClellan at the same time in that backfield, because then the defense is really confused when they look at this. Both of those guys are both phenomenal running backs, but are really dangerous pass catchers, and because of that, a defense has to account for absolutely everything, something I really hope we see this week, because I think they can really take advantage of Texas's defense maybe trying to be a bit over-aggressive and trying to make plays, and Alabama can take advantage of that. Alabama is going to look to challenge Texas in all areas of the field, whether that's short, intermediate, or deep. They are going to be trying to generate all phases of the game, and deservedly so whenever you look at the playmakers and certainly the quarterback at hand. And whenever you look at this, there's a key for Alabama's offense that they're getting back this week that I think is huge, and that's Cameron Latu, someone they didn't have for week one. And whenever you break down the film from week one, there were times where if Latu had been present, he's such a proven blocker, he's such a proven offensive weapon, Alabama's offense could have sustained more drives, or at least had an easier time sustaining drives than they did, and that's saying something considering they won 55-0, and Bryce was out pretty much well at the beginning of the third quarter. I digress. Cameron Latu coming back is huge for this Crimson Tide offense. There certainly is no taking anything away from that, especially when you take into account that he's Bryce Young's most experienced weapon, and they get him back versus Texas, and now we get to see this offense in its complete form. If you're Texas's defense, the only real weakness Alabama's offense holds is the inconsistency at offensive line. However, therein lies a new problem. Because if Texas's defensive front is able to get Bryce Young out the pocket, a new monster has entered the chat. Because sure, you've done a great job getting Bryce Young uncomfortable in the pocket, and now you've moved him out the pocket. Now you have to deal with Bryce Young on the run. And for Texas's defense, being disciplined is going to be king. And I know some of you are sitting there saying, duh, in all football games, discipline is king. Yes, but whenever you're dealing with a quarterback that's a legit magician like Bryce Young is, whenever he gets out the pocket, he's just as dangerous there as he is in the pocket. You don't know whether he's going to use his legs as an extension of the passing game or he's going to take off running on you. So if you're Texas's defense and Bryce Young moves from the pocket, there could be an inclination to go and attack him. However, if you do that, you may be leaving a wide receiver, a tight end, a running back open, and Bryce is going to pop it right over your head to that open target. We see him do it time and time again. So dealing with Bryce Young is a little bit unique given everything he brings to the table. From a linebacking perspective, they have to stay home and once again be disciplined. Because Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be a legitimate force in the passing game, but not even if he has the ball in his hand. His presence as a decoy is already something that's proven positive for the Crimson Tide. Go back to Utah State, watch how the Utah State defense would sometimes sell out to try and stop the short pass to Jahmyr Gibbs, and Bryce Young would sit there and look at them and say thank you and hit Kobe Prentice for a 10-yard gain because they all step forward. That's exactly what Texas can't afford to have happen, because if they get in that kind of rhythm and get the Texas defense guessing, we know what this Alabama offense does to opponents that they have guessing. That's not where you want to be. On the outside, Texas has a true freshman defensive back they love, plus a guy out the transfer portal in Ryan Watts, who is a very talented playmaker. So there's going to be some great matchups there, but at the end of the day, if Texas's defense isn't able to get home to Bryce Young and you give him time, it's going to be tough for any defense in the nation to stop the playmakers Alabama has in open field and with that amount of time. This is going to be such a treat of a game to watch. I simply cannot wait. Hop down in the comments. Let me know what you're thinking. That's it. See ya.